Hello, welcome to the MuseScore Café for today, Wednesday, March 27th, 2019. And my name is Marc Sabatella. I'm the Director of Education for MuseScore, and this is a series of weekly chats that I do, and on whatever topic I feel like talking about and whatever anyone else asks about in comments. So you're welcome to participate in the chat and ask me questions or say whatever you like. I go in with a topic that I kind of intend to talk about, and today I wanted to talk about plugins because it's something that's been coming up recently on the forums. And MuseScore 3, when it first came out, we had disabled the plugins because we had converted a lot of things over and they needed to be updated. As of the current release 3.0.5, plugins are working pretty well again. So some of the plugins need to be updated to work, but this is happening, and so I want to talk about plugins, what they are, what they're good for, and how to use them. So that's kind of what I'm planning on talking about. Hey, Marcus. So what are plugins? So MuseScore is, as I've often talked about, is open source, meaning that anyone around the world who's a programmer can get involved in working on improving MuseScore. But some sorts of things that you might want to be able to do as a programmer are things that maybe don't really belong within MuseScore itself, but are sort of add-on programs that you can create. And so as a user, you can use all these add-on programs called plugins that other people have created to extend the capabilities of MuseScore. So a plugin is something that's not built into MuseScore, but is something that someone has contributed, a little add-on program that can do things that are useful. And there's a number of them that are available for MuseScore 3. Just to give you an idea, and I'm going to talk about some of these specifically, there's one that, for instance, color notes. Let's take a look at what that one does. And these are ones that I've installed, by the way. They don't come pre-installed, but we'll talk about the process. So if I put in some notes and then I select them and I run the color notes plugin, well, they look blue right now because they're all selected, but now you'll see that they are colored. They're colored according to, I want to say it's the color scheme used by the Boomwhackers, which is a particular sort of musical instrument thing used in elementary education a lot. I think this is the color scheme used for Boomwhackers. So sorry about the time change. In the United States, we go into daylight savings time. It's a little earlier the last couple of years than it has been, it seems. That changes my offset. It's always 10:30 for me, 10:30 a.m. for me, but it changes what time it is. And for anyone else in the United States, it stays the same offset, but outside the United States, you might find it's a different time as of last week. So anyhow, so the plugin is what did this color change. The ability to change colors of notes individually is built into MuseScore. Normally, you would access that by the inspector. You can select a note and change its color over here. But the plugin goes through and automatically detects the pitch of every note and makes all the C's red, all the D's orange, all the E's yellow, and so forth. So that's the sort of thing that a plugin can do. So when you first install MuseScore, there's a set of plugins that are kind of pre-installed, but none of them will show up in the menu here. These ones that are in the menu are all ones that I enabled. So in order to use plugins, if you are brand new to MuseScore, or if you have never used plugins before, the only two things you'll see in the plugins menu are these two. When you go to Plugin Manager, you will then see a list of plugins here because some of them are pre-installed. You don't have to download them. You just have to enable them. So by putting a checkbox here, it enables one of the a plugin that was already pre-installed. So I downloaded several of these. I suppose I should know which ones I downloaded and which ones I didn't, right? That would be a good thing for me to be able to make sure that I can tell you. So let me think about that for a second. If I go here, this will tell me which ones. So it looks like the harp, the harmony, tempo, and courtesy. So it looks like ABC was in there already, which I kind of thought. Color notes was in there already. Create score. Some of these other ones. Some of these others are just demos to help programmers learn how to use Okay, what about C sharp in the color? That's a good question. I don't know. I'm going to guess that probably that is the case. So let's find out. Let's enter a C sharp. And if I select this and run that color, what am I doing? Color notes. What color is it? Yeah, it's a different color, isn't it? Yeah, it's a slightly different shade. So I guess it looks like it's not the same as this, and it's not the same as this. It's I guess it's trying to. This is kind of clever, the color scheme, because it does look like this color is kind of halfway in between those two, right? So I guess that's how the plugin works. What we can do if you're a programmer and you're curious about such things, you can use the plugin creator, which allows you to then edit these plugins. And so if you're a programmer, I've never actually used this plugin creator, to be honest. I've written a couple plugins back when I first was getting involved in MuseScore. So the color one, since I didn't install it, it's in the pre-installed section, so I have to find where that is. It's no, not Windows. What am I doing? Program files, MuseScore. So this is all relevant, right? So if you're a programmer and you're interested in developing your own plugins or maybe customizing behavior of some here. So here's the color notes one. I can load it into the plugin creator here and make this window bigger, and then I can edit the thing, and now here I can see the colors. This is the colors that are used, and these are all RGB codes. So if you do much with color, you know that it's 2 digits FF from 00 to FF. For how much red there is, how much green there is, and how much blue there is, and that's how colors are represented within a computer. And there's if you use a color any sort of color app that lets you pick colors, it'll usually show you those values, the RGB values. So you just plug in whatever values you'd rather have here, and you can customize that. So you can actually edit this plugin and save it and then run the edited version and use that. So I'm not going to so much talk about developing plugins because I am not actually an expert on that. As I said, that was my first introduction to programming in MuseScore back with the 1.1 release. I think I added a couple plugins that worked with it, but I'm a little out of touch with how to do the plugin development now. But I do know that this plugin creator is a new to me tool. It didn't exist in 1.1 that lets you, it's kind of like a debugger for plugins, and so if you're a developer, you can use this and it will help you develop your plugin. So I want to talk though mostly about using plugins, installing them and using them. So again, the first step here was to go to Plugin Manager and select which of the plugins you want. I guess I accidentally unchecked ABC import. That's actually a very nice one that I like. So of the pre-installed ones, Color Notes is kind of useful. A lot of these other ones, though, are really just demos. The Create, Score, Hello World is sort of a, it's like the beginning program assignment you always get as a program that prints Hello World, so that there's a, you can see how to do that in a plugin. So most of these are, the pre-installed ones are just there kind of to help you understand how to use how to write plugins. The ones that I installed that are very useful to me is this one about courtesy accidentals, which actually has 3 different plugins in the package. There's an add, a remove, and a configure. And I'm going to show you those in a minute. And also this one about checking harmony rules, this one about harp pedal diagrams, and the tempo changes. The note names one I think was pre-installed also, and this is one that, let me run this so you can see note names. Note names, boom. It just puts letter names for the notes. This is a pre-installed plugin. All you have to do is enable it there, but I should mention that we now support note names directly within. Well, I don't even have to select anything. What I do is I right-click the staff and then say Staff Properties, Advanced Style Properties, and I set the note heads scheme to, there's all these different varieties here. So since I know we have a lot of Europeans, I'm going to not go with the American one here, and I'm going to go with this guy. So this now has created, put the note names right in here. There's do, re, mi, and maybe if I make it bigger, you can see that it did that. And what's nice about this is if you change the pitches, it changes them automatically for you, the note names. So this, let's see. So Bruno, I'm not sure I understand your question. If you want to explain a little more what you mean, I'm happy to try to address it. So yeah, the note names plugin will just display the note as text above, and then it doesn't automatically change when you change the notes. You'd have to rerun the plugin to get the note names there. But this built-in facility of just putting note names within the notes, that's built in. So that plugin is no longer as, maybe important as it once was now that we have this built-in thing, but it is there. So those are maybe the color notes and the note names plugins are maybe the two most useful of the built-in plugins. But the other plugins that you get to get them, you currently go to MuseScore.org, same place you downloaded MuseScore from. And here you'll see download plugins. So I'm going to put this link there in the chat so that I'll have that available. The plugins right now, these are the ones that are updated to work with MuseScore 3. If I switch this to MuseScore 2, you'll see that there were quite a few plugins that were developed before that haven't been updated yet. These are all ones contributed by various people. Here's the login names of the people who created them. So some of these haven't been updated yet. Some of them may never be updated because they're, whatever, the person who developed them isn't around anymore, or maybe they're not that commonly used, or they're no longer needed. But basically, if there's ones that people specifically want, let us know, and we'll, try to get the ones, we add them gradually. A couple people are working on updating plugins, and so we'll try to update ones that we can. But these are all user contributed. So when I say we, I mean the big we. I don't mean that handful of us who are MuseScore core developers. I mean anyone who's, most of these people have never probably contributed to the MuseScore development, like the actual development of the application. They've just contributed plugins, which is great. I just mean that. So I don't know that these people are necessarily still around, but maybe someone else who uses the plugin would want to try their hand at updating it. It's not much involved in updating it. For most of them, it's just like changing one line in it. That, in fact, if I go back to Plugin Creator, I think I can even tell you where that line is. In Plugin Creator, right here, version 3.0. Oh no, import MuseScore 3.0. I think this line is the one that probably says import MuseScore 2 point something. You have to update something here to get it to work with MuseScore 3. And if it looks like this, there's a good chance it'll work. Anyhow, to download the plugins, you go to that download plugins page here, and so this, let me go back to make sure I've got just the 3.0 versions. Okay. So let's download one that I haven't downloaded before. This one here is kind of fascinating to me, traditional vocal beaming. I'm going to click it, and what it does is it will change the beaming. So MuseScore uses what's kind of considered the modern standard, where we beam notes according to the rhythm. In older editions, it was pretty common to have in vocal scores to break the beams according to syllables for vocal scores, so that if there's a melisma, one syllable across several notes would beam them, but if it's individual syllables, then we don't beam them. It still used some, but it's where more and more people are moving to this standard, but this was definitely the older standard, and so this plugin will make that happen automatically. Let's see. Yeah, so I would agree with that comment about developing plugins. It's if you're actually a programmer, interested in contributing to MuseScore, in some ways it can be easier to actually work on MuseScore itself than to work on plugins. But I will say, I don't know. There's things about plugins that are comfortable for people who are used to dealing with JavaScript, because this QML is essentially JavaScript. In classical music, we expect beams and slurs. So you mean... Yeah, I'm not even talking about modern jazz. I'm talking about modern classical music as well. Modern editions, modern publishers, people who are creating new engravings are more likely to use this style here, because it is clearer with respect to the rhythm. But it is true that people who mostly work in older music or producing modern editions of older works that are designed, to, I don't know, appeal to the audience that's more accustomed to this style will continue to do this. But this style really is quite common in the modern classical world, to beam according to rhythms, basically. You're not in Europe. Yeah. I see what you're saying. That this isn't common in Europe. Well, Elaine Gould is in Europe, unless Great Britain doesn't count as Europe for you because of Brexit, which is perhaps a thing. But Elaine Gould recommends this. She is not a fan of this style in Behind Bars, and that's kind of the modern reference. So anyhow, it's two different styles of beaming. So we could talk about which is popular, why which is popular, whatever. This is what MuseScore does by default. This is what the plugin does. We'll convert it into this. So let's go ahead and download the plugin. It says download plugin for MuseScore 3. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I do this, and then where I'm going to put it is in, not in my scores folder, but I'm going to put it in MuseScore 3 plugins. And I will save it there. And you'll see it's a zip file, so I'm going to have to do something with it. I'm going to have to unzip it. And so the details of this will kind of, vary depending on whether you're Windows or Mac or whatever. I am opening up this zip file, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say extract all, and what it's going to do is extract those files into a folder by the same name, and it just did the right thing. I'm just telling you that's all you have to do on Windows. You can worry about exactly what it did. What it did is it created a folder here called Traditional Vocal Beaming, and within it is another folder of the same name. You could manage that better than I just did, but it works. I unpacked it into the plugins folder. So now if I go back to MuseScore here and say plugins, plugin manager, I will now see Traditional Vocal Beaming listed as an option. So I can now enable that, which I just did, and now there it is in the plugins menu. So again, I went to plugin manager, I put a checkbox next to the one that I had just downloaded, and then I see it showing up here. So what does it do? Well, let's go ahead and create a new score. I'll go ahead and use a choral template. Publishers, newer, keep the other style. John Rutter, maybe. I can't speak to specific composers. Again, all I can say is there actually does exist modern music that uses the modern standard. You can debate whether you like it better, whether you're more familiar with it or not. The fact is, the beaming standard that is used here really is used in the real world, as well as the older one, as well as the older standard. So they're both used, and they're both fine standards for what they are. So I can put in some notes, and I'll just put in more notes. A whole bunch of eighth notes, beamed according to the rhythm. And I think it's mostly music that has complex rhythms in which, syncopations and so forth that are most likely to want the more modern style where the beaming helps you see the beat, is probably my guess. And so yeah, jazz certainly would be an example of that, but any form of music in which this is the case, I know, most of the modern classical composers that I use this style of beaming here, with the beams indicate the rhythms. But let's put in some notes, some lyrics here. I'm going to go A, B, C, D, and I'm going to go with like one syllable per note here, but then here I'm going to go H, I, and then J. So let's see what happens now if I run the plugin. I'll select all, because usually the plugins work on a selection. Some of them might like automatically select the full score if you haven't done so already. I'm going to say traditional vocal beaming, and let's see what happens. Look at that. So it beamed all of these notes individually. It made a melisma here, and it did this. Now, since I'm not as familiar with this style, I have to wonder, is this really what you would want? 3 of these beamed together and one by himself? So, because to me this is quite unclear now. It makes this look very much like a triplet. And I wonder if that's... I mean, this is what the plugin is doing. I wonder if this is something that should be tweaked about it, because I actually don't know what what publishers who use this style would have done. Yeah, this is okay. So there we go. So that's created this. So yeah, you can also add slurs then to indicate that that is a melisma there. So that is that plugin, and so it'll take your score and automatically rebeam, break the beams as necessary to establish that. Now, what happens if I have a whole bunch of eighth notes and it's just one long thing? Is it going to actually beam them all together? Let's find out. K, L, M. All right, let's find out what happens if I run it on these measures. If I go plugins, traditional vocal beaming. Okay, good. So it did still maintain this. To me, that feels important to still maintain the middle of the bar there. But if you would prefer to see these literally all beamed together, I guess you can still do that manually by going to beam properties and saying middle of beam. All right, so that's how you basically run a plugin. You select something you want it to operate on, and then you select it from the menu. So, okay, good. Still respect it. Good, because that makes sense. I have pre-installed a few different plugins that I mentioned I find useful. The one that I use absolutely the most is this one here, Add Courtesy Accidentals. This to me it's so fundamentally important that it's eventually something I want to see built into MuseScore and not require a plugin. So what does it do? Well, let me show you. If I put in some notes here, C, C sharp. If you really think about the rules of music notation, this is a C sharp, that's a C sharp, that's a C sharp. But this one is a C natural because the bar line cancels the sharp. But this is not at all obvious reading it. Most people sight reading this are going to mess it up because, yes, technically this is a C natural now because of the bar line, but we don't see that. We don't process that information sight reading. So playing this, very likely people are going to play a C sharp or sing a C sharp. So what we normally want to do is add what's called a courtesy accidental. Yes, this is literally a natural. I don't need a natural sign, but it's a courtesy to the performer to add one. So I add one here. So normally you can add them manually like this. Then when you're people are reading it, they see this. But it can be difficult to find, or it's just a lot to think about to remember where you're going to need to use these things. So I'm going to put in, let's see, I'll then go with, I want to show a couple other examples. So C sharp, and then a C down here, and then I don't know what I'm doing. C up here, down here. because I forget how this thing is working by default. But this one should get a courtesy accidental. Some people would say this one should get a courtesy accidental also. This one probably doesn't need one because it's at a different octave. But this different octave, same measure, some people like to put courtesy accidentals there. So let's see what the plugin Add Courtesy Accidentals does by default. Did I ask for the configure? I guess maybe it does it the first time. I can't remember. I'll have to check that out again. But here you get to choose whether you want various different things, whether you want just the next measure. Like what if this C natural wasn't in the very next measure, but was 2 measures later? Here you get to control that. And also maybe all notes up to the next double bar line or whatever. There's different ways of doing this. So let's go ahead and hit the add accidentals and see what it did. Well, it added this one because it was the same octave in the very next measure. So that's kind of the default. For that all those non-necessary are in parentheses. So yeah, so this is a thing. Some people like their courtesy accidentals in parentheses. What the actual engraver's rule is that you don't put these in parentheses, but if you did put a courtesy on this one to show it's a different octave, that goes in parentheses. And also if you put an additional one in the same measure, like what if this measure had had a C sharp and then a billion other 16th notes and then another C sharp later on? It might be easy to forget that it was C sharp earlier in the measure. And so that one would also be added as a courtesy accidental if you want it in parentheses. So that's kind of the standard engraver's rule. It's the ones that are in the very next measure don't get parentheses. They're not optional at all. You have to put them in there, and you put them in there without parentheses by default. But these other ones where maybe you do it for different octaves, maybe you do it later on in the same measure, using parentheses on those. That's sort of the standard engraver's rule, but some people like to put all their courtesy accidentals in parentheses. So I'm going to undo that. This time I'm going to go through, I'll just select all, and add courtesy accidentals. So I'm a little surprised when this dialog comes up, because it used to be that add courtesy accidentals just did it automatically, and it was the configure courtesy accidentals that showed up this dialog. So I think that might have changed when they updated it. But you can certainly say you want accidentals in parentheses and then add accidentals, and now it shows up in parentheses. And I think, well, let's find out if I run it again. Is it going to show? Is it going to remember that setting? Yes, it remembers that setting. So to be honest, I'm not actually sure what the configure version does anymore, because it seems like that's the same thing. Oh wow, they're backwards. What the heck? Did I just run configure? It looks like configure did nothing except remove them. Well, what does remove then do? Are they just misnamed in here? That's weird. What the heck? All right, I am quite confused. Oh, you know what's happening? It's running totally the wrong. I wonder if when I added, so I'm having to think aloud. Does it seem like, it seems like maybe when I added that one plugin, it somehow messed up the ordering of things, and it's running the wrong one. Because when I ran add, it really ran configure. When I ran configure, it ran remove. And when I'm running remove, trying to run remove, it's actually doing this proofreading one here, I think is what's happening. So I think, yeah, look at that. I think after adding, after downloading and installing a new plugin, it looks like there's a bug in which everything is off by 1, and hopefully this fixes itself when you reload. So hopefully I will find that is the case. All right, so let's see if that's the case. See, and my sound disappeared. I think I have too many other applications conflicting with the sound. There we go. Having 2 different versions of MuseScore together, they sometimes fight each other. I had a development version. You know, I was fixing a bug the other day or last night. So if I now select this, I'll just select all, and then say add. Hopefully it just adds them. Yeah, there we go. Now everything's right. So if I select all and run configure, then I get my dialog box and it remembers the setting from before. So there you go. Yeah, I guess after adding a new plugin, best to restart MuseScore. That seems like a bug. I will go ahead and file that if no one else does. So that's an extremely useful one. I rely on all the time because courtesy accidentals are really essentially important, but they're really easy to forget, really easy to keep, hard to keep track of where they're going to be needed and where they're not. So the other one that a lot of people really get a lot of use out of is this one here, the tempo changes. So let me just put in some music. Let's delete this and just go. Whatever, fine. That's what I get for going too fast. What if I want the tempo to gradually slow down over this measure, retard? So what I can do is select the measure where I want the retard, go to retardando, go to the tempo changes plugin, which is one of the ones you can download, and then you pick what you want your text to say, in this case, rit. And then I tell it what tempo I want to start at and what tempo I want to end at. I don't know what happens if you leave it blank. Maybe it knows it just uses the current tempo. I'm going to guess that that's the case. And then let's put a 60 on it and see what this does. Let's find out. So what it did is it put in the word retard there, and then it put in a bunch of invisible tempo changes to sort of indicate to gradually slow down. So when I play it now, and now it's at the new tempo. And if I want to have, if I want it to then return back to the original tempo, I can change this to say a tempo. You can do this however you like. The point is, it inserts these invisible tempo changes for you, and it kind of calculates what the values are and where to put them to get a smooth change. And the same with accelerando. You put in your start tempo, you put in your end tempo, and it will put in invisible tempo markings to achieve a gradual increase in tempo. So that is one that's quite useful if you're doing, if you're really trying to get the playback, of a piece to be authentic, to feel like it's honoring your retard marking. Now there's also, as far as different standards different publishers use, the retard marking itself is I want to click the retard. Okay, so here's the deal. Right now this is something, when I click, these markings are overlapping. If I click, the tempo marking is actually getting selected here. There's something I added recently where if you control click, it will flip between the different markings. So it'll either select the 120 there, or the retard, or nothing, is what it keeps flipping between. But I'm doing this, and I'm not convinced that it's actually doing what I say it's doing. So let me see. Let me change the one. Let me select the 121. And then what I want to do is I want to change the one that just says retard. I want to change it to be to use the tempo text style. So I'm control clicking right here, and it's selecting and unselecting that tempo marking, but it's never getting the rit. And I think that's because that change that I made maybe is only merged for the master, in other words, for what's going to be 3.1. So sorry, I was going to show you a cool new feature I implemented, but I think it's maybe not in, but I thought it was. I have to check on that. But it should have been the case that when I control click overlapping markings, yeah, it's just going back and forth between selecting and unselecting it. It should be the case, though, that in a coming release, that if you control click overlapping markings, it'll kind of cycle through them. So what I wanted to do, though, let me just move this out of the way for a moment. I want to select this guy, the retard, and I just want to change it to tempo text style, so it at least looks like the rest of the tempo markings. Some people like to put retard markings in italics, so you can do that. You can kind of set that up however you want, and I can return that to his rightful position. So anyhow, that's the tempo changes plugin. The other one that I find useful as an educator and as a person who sometimes just likes to write 4-part music, if I go and let me just create a new score in SATB again. I think I showed this last week or sometime recently, and I wasn't sure if it was there or not, but it is definitely now. If I write in some SATB music and say, I'll just go C, D, E, F, G, because you know I like to do that. But in this voice, I'm going to go E, F, and I'm going to go A, B, C. Oops, down an octave, sorry. This interval here is a sixth, that interval there is a sixth, so that's all well and good. But here we have a fifth. Oh, that's a diminished fifth. That's okay. That might actually read as being okay. But let me make this be a B flat. Those of you who have taken music theory know perfect fifth, perfect fifth, perfect fifth. That's a no-no. And then if I then put in, say, I put in a D sharp here, this interval of an augmented second is one that some people say to avoid. So basically what this plugin is going to do, it's the Check Harmony Rules plugin. It will identify there's an augmented interval, there's parallel fifths. So it's a quick way of checking your work to make sure you're not breaking any of the traditional rules of harmony. Now rules schmool sometimes. I mean, these are the things they teach you in music theory class, and yeah, it's true that if you look at Bach's music, you look at Mozart's music, you'll see generally they don't use parallel fifths, generally they don't use augmented intervals, except when they do. And so the rules are there to kind of give you a basic guideline. Boy, you probably want to avoid doing this thing because it's going to create this sound that's probably not what you want, but maybe sometimes it is what you want, or it's the best solution to a given problem. They're not like you go to jail if you break this rule. It's more like, yeah, just be careful about doing this. So anyhow, that Check Harmony Rules, I sometimes hesitate to tell people that plugin exists because it's going to put music theory teachers not out of business, but music theory students normally are supposed to spend a lot of time learning how to avoid it, and now the program can do it for you. But oh well. So music theory students, there you go. You now have a plugin that can do for you, help you check your homework. And then you still got to fix it yourself. So there you go. So those are the plugins I use the most. I also wanted to show this Harp Diagram plugin because it is kind of cool. Harp music, if you know anything about harp and you've ever written for harp or played harp, you may know, is it under keyboards? No, where's harp? I can't remember. It's a stringed instrument. Harp, strings plucked, of course. So I've added a harp to my piece. The harp plugin allows you to create pedal diagrams. And I forget how it works. I think I have to actually select some notes. Select some notes, run the plugin, and up pops this thing that lets you draw in a diagram of the pedals on a harp. The pedals on a harp control whether, when you pluck the C string, whether you get a C or a C sharp or a C flat, or the E, whether it's, because all the C, it's going to move all the strings the same way. It's a very interestingly designed instrument. So it doesn't have one string for every note. It's got basically 7 strings repeated: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then next octave C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And if you want to get C sharps, you set the pedal to make all your C's C sharps. And now all your C's across the whole harp are going to be C sharps. And so when you're writing music for harp, you have to be careful you don't use a C and a C sharp in the same measure, because you can't do that unless you change pedal. So you have to write an indication in there that it's time to change pedal. It's really a fascinating thing about writing harp music. So if I wanted to indicate to the harp player that he needs to change pedal to play some C sharps, I use this diagram, and it shows me the diagram, and then boom, it puts the little picture in there. Of course, you actually do also have to notate the C sharp. It's not like they only read the diagrams, but no, and the harp players will generally write in their own markings if you don't do it for them. But it is, if you're writing harp music, it is really useful to save the harpist the work of creating these diagrams. So you still have to know what you're doing, read about how harps work, but then the actual work of generating the diagram, this plugin does a marvelous job of doing for you. So anyhow, those are some of the plugins that I use on a regular basis. I mean, the harp one maybe not as regular as some of them, but I use that Courtesy Accidentals one all the time, and was very happy when it became possible again to use it, because for the first couple months that MuseScore 3 was out, plugins weren't working, and even when they first started working, that one wasn't working. But now that's working, and I'm happy. So that's my spiel about plugins. They do all sorts of useful tasks for you that are mostly things you could do yourself. I mean, I could go and look at my work and find my own parallel fifths. I could go figure out where I need to add Courtesy Accidentals and add them. I could create my own. This is just using some special font that it installs, and I could create this as text myself using that same font. In fact, if I double click this, how is that working? I see down here it says free serif, but it's not free serif. So I to be honest, I totally forget how this font works. It's using special characters within it, I guess. So it's magic to me. But presumably it would have been possible to do this without a plugin, just a lot more work. And so that's basically what plugins are for. They automate certain tasks that otherwise, you could have done but would have required more work. And so if there's certain things that you are thinking, gee, MuseScore could do this, it seems like it should do this automatically, I'm having to do this a lot manually, it's the sort of thing that maybe there's a plugin for, and you could go to the plugins page and see if there's one, and if not, maybe go to the plugins forum on musescore.org and request that someone write it. So just to show you where that is, so this was under download plugins is where I got there, but if I go to support, forum, and then plugins, this is where people are discussing plugin development, and that's maybe somewhere you could go and ask, pretty please, would someone write me up a plugin to do this? If it's the sort of thing that seems like it's a lot of other people might use, then someone might go ahead and write a plugin for it. Sometimes it makes more sense to just actually enhance MuseScore to do it for you, but some of these things are just specialized enough that, well, I don't see MuseScore doing parallel fifths checking for you. It's not something that's really MuseScore's job. The Courtesy Accidentals kind of was, to be honest. Harp, maybe. But these things are nice to do in plugins, because then people customize how they work. Like if I decide I want to change how these rules work, it's a lot easier for people to make these changes by editing a plugin. You saw I went to plugins, plugin creator. So if you're a programmer and you just want to tweak how this plugin works, it's pretty easy to do if it's a plugin. Whereas if you want to actually change how MuseScore works, you've got to really deal with how to do all the programming for MuseScore. So plugins are very useful. You don't have to be a programmer to use them. Oh yeah, I restarted MuseScore. So that's blank again. They're very useful. You don't have to be a programmer to use them, but if you are a programmer and are interested in extending the capabilities of MuseScore, sometimes that's a good place to start. Sometimes it makes sense to just jump right in and start learning how to do MuseScore programming. And I've done a couple sessions where I've showed a little bit about that process. We've got the Google Summer of Code coming up. I'll probably talk about that next week, actually. We are in the midst of the time when students are supposed to be submitting their proposals to participate in the Google Summer of Code. So if you're a student, a college student, and you're interested in programming and interested in MuseScore, and you're not familiar with the Google Summer of Code, Google it. It's a fantastic program where Google will basically pay you to work on open source software, and it's a competitive program. You have to submit applications and get accepted and all this stuff about it. But we every year we have participated in it most years anyhow, and usually have a handful of students, 3 or 4 students, who then are sponsored by Google to work on MuseScore and add different features to MuseScore, or add features, or it's not just a bug fix. We haven't had any projects that were just bug fixing. They were always something fun. The Google Summer of Code is a great way if you're a college student to get sponsored to work on MuseScore itself. I'll probably talk about that again some next week. So that's my story on plugins, and thanks for the comments. As always, if you have ideas for things that you'd like to see me talk about, just leave me a comment, shoot me an email, marc@musescore.com, and I'm always interested in talking about what people want to hear about. So with that, I will take my leave, and I will see you all next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.